The first rays of sunlight crept through the tall windows of Adelaide Cottage as Prince William woke up on what would become one of the most important days of his life. The soft morning light painted golden patterns across the bedroom walls where he and Kate had spent the night talking in hushed whispers about the day ahead. William stretched his arms and felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Today was different from any other day. Today the whole world would be watching his family. Kate was already awake beside him. She had been lying there for the past hour watching the sunrise and thinking about their 3 children sleeping in the rooms down the hall. Her mind raced with all the things that needed to happen perfectly. The dresses had to fit right. The children had to behave well. Every smile had to be genuine, yet appropriate for the cameras that would capture every single moment. The house staff had arrived early and were already preparing breakfast in the kitchen. The smell of fresh bread and coffee drifted upstairs as William and Kate got ready for their showers. They moved around each other with the easy familiarity of a couple who had been together for many years. William hummed softly while he shaved. Kate brushed her hair and applied her makeup with careful precision. Down the hallway, 9-year-old Prince George was already awake and sitting on his bed looking out the window. He could see cars arriving outside and people with cameras setting up in the distance. George understood that today was special, but he also felt nervous butterflies in his stomach. He had practiced walking properly and sitting still for hours during the past weeks. His grandfather had explained to him many times how important it was to represent the family well. Princess Charlotte was in her room trying on her special shoes for the 3rd time. The 7-year-old had been excited about this day for months. She had been practicing her curtsy and had memorized exactly when she was supposed to smile and when she was supposed to look serious. Charlotte loved being dressed up, and she especially loved that people would be taking pictures of her beautiful dress. 5-year-old Prince Louis was still fast asleep in his bed, clutching his favorite stuffed animal. Louis was the baby of the family, and sometimes he did not understand why everyone made such a big fuss about these special occasions. He just wanted to play with his toys and run around the garden. Kate knew that keeping Louis happy and calm during the long ceremony would be her biggest challenge of the day. William walked down the hall to check on his children. He knocked gently on George's door and found his eldest son already dressed in his underwear and trying to figure out how to put on his ceremonial uniform. The father and son worked together to get the complicated outfit right. William showed George how to fasten the gold buttons and adjust the small military jacket that made him look like a miniature version of his father. Kate went to Charlotte's room and found her daughter spinning around in her special dress. The pale blue fabric flowed around Charlotte's legs as she danced and twirled. Kate sat on the bed and helped Charlotte with her hair ribbons. They talked about how many people would be at the ceremony and how Charlotte should wave to the crowds. Charlotte asked her mother if she could bring her small purse, and Kate agreed that it would be perfect. Getting Louis ready was more complicated. The 5-year-old was grumpy from being woken up early, and he did not want to wear his formal clothes. Kate had to use all her patience and motherly tricks to convince him that wearing his special outfit would be fun. She told him stories about brave princes and showed him how handsome he looked in the mirror. Slowly, Louis began to smile and cooperate with getting dressed. The whole family gathered in the main sitting room for breakfast together. The dining table was set with their best china and fresh flowers. William sat at the head of the table wearing his full military uniform with all his medals and decorations. He looked every inch the future king, but his eyes were soft and gentle as he watched his family. Kate looked elegant in her ivory-colored dress with her sapphire jewelry sparkling in the morning light. George sat up very straight in his chair and cut his food carefully. He was practicing his best manners even though they were just having breakfast at home. Charlotte chattered excitedly about all the things she wanted to see and do during the ceremony. She asked her parents dozens of questions about who would be there and what would happen. Louis played with his food a little bit, but he was in a good mood and made his family laugh with his silly jokes. The household staff moved quietly around them, making sure everything was perfect. The head butler checked his watch frequently and updated William and Kate on the schedule. Hairstylists and makeup artists were waiting in the next room to make final adjustments. Security officers were stationed throughout the house and in the gardens outside. Kate helped Louis eat his breakfast and wiped his face clean. She straightened Charlotte's dress and smoothed down a piece of George's hair that was sticking up. William read through his notes one more time and practiced the words he might need to say to officials and dignitaries. The whole family was focused, but also relaxed together in their home. As the morning progressed, the energy in the house began to build. More staff members arrived. The cars that would take them to the ceremony were checked and rechecked. Photographers were setting up outside the gates. The children could hear helicopters flying overhead, and they ran to the windows to watch them pass by. Kate took a few quiet moments to herself in the garden. She walked among the flowers and took deep breaths of the fresh morning air. She thought about how much their lives had changed since she and William first met. She thought about the responsibility they had to their country and to their children. She felt proud and nervous and excited all at the same time. William joined her outside, and they stood together holding hands. They did not need to say much to each other. They both understood what this day meant and how important it was that they support each other through every moment. They watched their children playing on the lawn and felt grateful for the life they had built together as a family. The final preparations were beginning, and soon they would have to leave for the ceremony. But for now they were just a family enjoying a peaceful moment together in their garden, before stepping out into the world where millions of people would be watching their every move. The morning sun was getting brighter and warmer. It was going to be a beautiful day for a very special and important occasion that would be remembered for many years to come. The sound of helicopter blades cutting through the morning air grew louder as the royal family finished their final preparations at Adelaide Cottage. William looked out the window and saw the aircraft approaching across the English countryside. The sight made his heart beat faster because he knew there was no turning back now. In just a few minutes, they would be airborne and flying toward the most important ceremony of their lives. Kate gathered the children around her for one last check of their appearance. She smoothed down Charlotte's dress and made sure her hair ribbons were perfectly positioned. George stood still while his mother adjusted his military jacket and checked that all his buttons were fastened correctly. Little Louis was getting restless and kept trying to run toward the window to see the helicopter landing in their garden. The head of security approached William and gave him the final briefing about the day's schedule. They would fly directly to a landing area near Westminster Abbey where cars would be waiting to take them to the ceremony. The flight would take about 20 minutes and they needed to be prepared for crowds of people and photographers at every step of the journey. Outside the cottage, dozens of staff members were making final preparations. The helicopter pilot checked his instruments one more time. Security officers positioned themselves around the landing area. The household staff lined up to wave goodbye to the family they had been serving and protecting for so many years. William took Kate's hand and squeezed it gently. They walked together toward the door that would lead them outside and into the helicopter. The children followed behind them, with Charlotte holding George's hand and Louis skipping along beside them. As they stepped outside the cottage, the noise from the helicopter became much louder, and the wind from the spinning blades made their clothes flutter. The pilot saluted William as the family approached the aircraft. He had been flying members of the royal family for many years, but he still felt honored every time he was chosen for such an important mission. The helicopter was decorated with small flags and had been polished until it gleamed in the morning sunlight. Kate helped the children climb into their seats while William spoke briefly with the pilot about the flight path they would take over London. The inside of the helicopter was comfortable with soft leather seats and large windows that would give them perfect views of the city below. Each family member had their own headset so they could talk to each other during the flight, despite the noise of the engines. As the helicopter lifted off from the garden of Adelaide Cottage, the children pressed their faces to the windows to watch their home disappear below them. Charlotte pointed excitedly at the cars and people getting smaller and smaller as they climbed higher into the sky. George tried to identify different landmarks that he recognized from his geography lessons. Louis laughed with delight at the feeling of flying through the air. Kate looked down at the English countryside passing beneath them and felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She could see roads filled with cars heading toward London. People were gathering in fields and on rooftops, hoping to catch a glimpse of the helicopter carrying the royal family. Some people were waving flags and banners, even though they were too far away for the family to see them clearly. William pointed out different sights to his children as they flew over small towns and villages. He showed them ancient castles and beautiful churches that had been standing for hundreds of years. He explained how all of these places were part of the country that George would one day help to lead and protect. George listened carefully to everything his father said and asked thoughtful questions about the history and importance of different locations. The helicopter flew over forests and farms where people had stopped their work to look up at the sky. Charlotte waved enthusiastically, even though she knew the people below could not see her through the aircraft windows. She was already practicing for all the waving she would need to do when they arrived at Westminster Abbey and met the crowds of people waiting to see them. As they approached the outskirts of London, the landscape below them began to change. There were more houses and buildings packed closely together. The roads became busier with traffic moving in all directions. Kate could see that many of the cars were decorated with British flags and royal wedding decorations. People had planned special parties and celebrations to mark this historic day. Louis was getting tired from all the excitement, and he leaned against his mother's shoulder. Kate stroked his hair gently and whispered quiet words to keep him calm and comfortable. She knew that the hardest part of the day was still ahead of them, and she wanted to make sure Louis was in the best possible mood when they arrived at the ceremony. The pilot's voice came through their headsets to tell them they were approaching central London. William and Kate looked out the windows and saw the Thames River winding through the heart of the city. They could see Big Ben and the Houses of Parliament and all the other famous landmarks that made London one of the most recognizable cities in the world. The helicopter began to descend as they flew over streets packed with thousands of people. The crowds were so thick that Kate could barely see the pavement between all the bodies pressed together. People were holding up phones and cameras trying to take pictures of the helicopter. British flags were waving everywhere, and the whole city seemed to be painted in red, white, and blue. George stared in amazement at the huge number of people who had come to see them. He had never imagined that so many people cared about his family and what they were doing. The sight made him feel proud, but also a little scared about the responsibility that came with being noticed by so many people. Charlotte was practically bouncing in her seat with excitement. She could see all the beautiful decorations that had been put up around the city for the ceremony. Banners were hanging from buildings, and flowers had been planted in special patterns in the parks and squares. Everything looked magical and perfect for such an important day. The helicopters circled around Westminster Abbey so the family could see the ancient building where the ceremony would take place. The Abbey looked majestic and imposing with its tall towers reaching toward the sky. Kate could see crowds of people already gathering outside the building, even though the ceremony would not begin for several more hours. As they prepared to land, William gathered his family together for a final moment of quiet conversation. He reminded the children about their important role in representing their country and their family. He told them how proud he was of how well they had been preparing for this day. Kate added her own words of encouragement and love. The helicopter touched down gently in the designated landing area. Through the windows they could see cars waiting to take them to Westminster Abbey. Security officers and official representatives were standing ready to escort them to the next phase of their journey. The moment had arrived to step out into the public eye and begin the ceremony that would be remembered for generations to come. The black cars pulled up to Westminster Abbey with perfect timing as thousands of people who had been waiting for hours erupted into cheers and applause. William could hear the roar of the crowd even through the thick windows of their official vehicle. He took a deep breath and looked at his family one final time before they would step out into the bright lights and cameras that would capture every moment of their arrival. Kate checked her appearance in a small mirror and made sure her sapphire earrings were positioned correctly. Her ivory dress had traveled perfectly during their journey, and she looked elegant and composed, despite the butterflies dancing in her stomach. She turned to help Charlotte with her hair ribbon one more time and whispered encouraging words to prepare her daughter for the excitement. Waiting outside, George sat up very straight in his seat and practiced the serious expression he had been working on for weeks. The 9-year-old understood that cameras would be watching him from the moment he stepped out of the car. He wanted to make his parents proud and show everyone that he was ready to take on the responsibilities that came with being future king of England. Charlotte pressed her face to the window and gasped at the sight of so many people gathered outside the ancient abbey. She could see children her own age waving flags and holding signs with her family's names written in colorful letters. Some people had been camping outside for days just to get the best spots to see the royal family arrive. The 7-year-old felt like a real princess in a fairy tale. Little Louis was getting overwhelmed by all the noise and excitement. The 5-year-old held tightly to his mother's hand and asked when they could go home to play in their garden. Kate spoke to him in her gentlest voice and promised that after the ceremony they would have time to relax together as a family. She reminded him that he was going to see many interesting things inside the beautiful old church. The security officer in the front seat spoke into his radio to coordinate with the teams of people who were managing the crowds and ensuring everyone's safety. He had been planning this day for months, and every detail had been rehearsed many times. He gave William a final briefing about the route they would take from the car to the Abbey entrance. Outside the vehicle, dozens of photographers were positioning themselves to get the perfect shots of the royal family's arrival. Camera crews from television stations around the world had set up their equipment to broadcast live coverage of every moment. The flashing lights from cameras created an almost constant strobe effect that lit up the ancient stones of Westminster Abbey. William stepped out of the car first and immediately straightened his military uniform. The crowd's cheers became even louder when they saw him emerge into the bright morning sunlight. He stood tall and confident while he waited for Kate to join him. His medals caught the light and reflected small rainbows across his chest as he moved. Kate emerged from the car with graceful movements that had been perfected through years of public appearances. Her dress flowed beautifully as she stepped onto the red carpet that had been laid out for their arrival. The crowd whistled and cheered their approval of her elegant appearance. She smiled warmly and waved to the people who had waited so long to see her. George was the next to appear, and the crowd gave him a special cheer, because everyone understood that they were looking at their future king. The young boy walked with careful dignity and kept his expression serious but kind. He had been practicing his royal wave, and he raised his hand to acknowledge the people who were calling his name and taking his picture. Charlotte practically bounced out of the car with excitement and energy. Her pale blue dress caught the breeze and fluttered around her legs as she immediately began waving enthusiastically to everyone she could see. The crowd loved her natural joy and spontaneous reactions. Children in the audience waved back at her, and she pointed to some of them with delight. Louis emerged more slowly and stayed close to his mother's side. The noise and crowds were bigger than anything he had experienced before, and he felt a little scared. Kate took his hand and bent down to whisper something in his ear that made him smile. With his mother's encouragement, he managed a small wave to the people, who were cheering for him. The family walked together along the red carpet toward the massive wooden doors of Westminster Abbey. The ancient building looked magnificent with its tall towers reaching toward the cloudy sky. Flowers had been arranged in beautiful displays around the entrance, and British flags hung from every available pole and window dot as they approached the Abbey doors. William and Kate could see dignitaries and officials from around the world waiting inside to greet them. The Archbishop was standing ready to welcome them with formal words that had been used for royal ceremonies for hundreds of years. Everything was proceeding exactly according to the detailed plans that had been made months in advance. The crowds cheering followed them as they walked, but the sounds began to fade as they moved closer to the heavy stone walls of the Abbey. Charlotte kept turning around to wave at people until Kate gently reminded her to face forward and prepare for entering the church. George maintained his composed expression, but his eyes were wide as he took in all the pageantry surrounding them. Inside the Abbey, hundreds of guests were already seated and waiting for the ceremony to begin. William could see heads of state from countries around the world, celebrities and dignitaries, religious leaders, and members of parliament. Everyone was dressed in their finest clothes, and the atmosphere was electric with anticipation for what was about to unfold. Kate paused at the entrance to take one final moment to collect herself and prepare her children for what they would experience inside. The Abbey was filled with the sound of a magnificent organ playing traditional hymns. The ancient stones seemed to absorb the music and amplify it, until it felt like the whole building was vibrating with beautiful sounds. Louis looked up at the incredibly high ceiling decorated with intricate carvings and colorful stained glass windows. The 5-year-old had never been inside such a grand and impressive building. He asked his mother in a whisper if they were inside a castle, and Kate smiled at his innocent wonder. Charlotte was amazed by all the flowers that had been arranged throughout the Abbey. Thousands of white roses and other beautiful blooms created displays that looked like something from a dream. The sweet fragrance mixed with the smell of old wood and stone to create an atmosphere that felt both ancient and fresh at the same time. George studied the faces of all the important people who had come to witness this historic ceremony. He recognized some of them from photographs in newspapers and magazines. The young boy understood that he was participating in an event that would be remembered and talked about for many years to come. The family moved slowly down the aisle toward their designated seats as everyone in the packed Abbey turned to watch their progress. Camera flashes continued to light up their path, and the organ music swelled to welcome them into this sacred space, where so many important moments in British history had taken place over the centuries. The ancient organ music filled every corner of Westminster Abbey as Prince William and his family took their places in the front row of wooden pews that had witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies. The sound echoed off the high stone walls and seemed to make the very air vibrate with importance and tradition. William felt the weight of history pressing down on him as he looked around at the faces of world leaders and dignitaries who had traveled from every continent to be present for this momentous occasion. Kate sat beside her husband with perfect posture, while keeping a careful eye on their 3 children. She could feel the eyes of hundreds of guests and millions of television viewers around the world watching their every movement. Her sapphire earrings caught the light streaming through the magnificent stained glass windows as she turned her head to make sure Charlotte was sitting properly and that Louis was not getting too restless. 9-year-old George sat with remarkable composure for a child his age. He had spent weeks practicing how to sit still and look appropriate during long formal ceremonies. The young boy understood that cameras were focused on him and that people everywhere were watching to see how the future king would behave during such an important event. His small military uniform was perfectly pressed, and his hair was combed neatly into place. Princess Charlotte was trying her best to sit like a proper young lady, but her natural excitement kept bubbling up to the surface. The 7-year-old kept looking around at all the beautiful decorations and the important people filling every seat in the ancient building. Her pale blue dress was spread carefully around her legs, and she held her small purse in her lap, just as her mother had taught her to do. 5-year-old Prince Louis was having the hardest time staying still during the lengthy ceremony. The little boy had never been required to sit quietly for such a long period of time. He kept shifting in his seat and looking around at all the interesting sights surrounding him. Kate had prepared special quiet activities to keep him occupied. She knew that managing Louis would be her biggest challenge of the entire day. The Archbishop stood at the altar wearing magnificent robes that sparkled with gold thread and precious stones. His voice carried clearly through the abbey as he began the ancient words that had been spoken at royal coronations for over 1,000 years. Every syllable was pronounced with perfect clarity and deep reverence for the sacred traditions. Being observed, the choir began to sing hymns that had been chosen specifically for this ceremony. Their voices blended together in perfect harmony and rose toward the vaulted ceiling like prayers made of music. The sound was so beautiful that even little Louis stopped fidgeting and listened with wide eyes and an open mouth. Charlotte whispered to her mother that the singing sounded like angels. William stood when the ceremony required it and spoke his responses in a clear, strong voice that carried throughout the abbey. He had memorized every word he needed to say and had practiced the pronunciation until it was perfect. His medals gleamed on his chest, and his military uniform represented all the service and dedication he had given to his country throughout his adult life. Kate watched her husband with pride and love shining in her eyes. She had supported him through years of preparation for this moment, and she knew how much responsibility was being placed on his shoulders. Her own role as future queen consort was also beginning on this day, and she felt ready to serve alongside him in whatever challenges lay ahead for their family and their nation. The most touching moment of the ceremony came when Prince Louis began to get overwhelmed by all the formality and solemnity surrounding him. The 5-year-old started to squirm in his seat and make small whimpering sounds that threatened to become louder. Without missing a beat, Kate leaned down and whispered something in his ear that made him giggle softly and settle back into his place. The brief exchange between mother and child was captured by television cameras and broadcast around the world. Millions of viewers saw the gentle way Kate handled the situation and were reminded that beneath all the pageantry and protocol, this was simply a loving mother taking care of her young son. The moment showed the human side of the royal family that people everywhere could relate to and appreciate. George watched everything with serious attention and tried to learn from observing how his parents conducted themselves during such an important occasion. The young boy knew that he would one day need to participate in ceremonies like this as the King of England. He wanted to remember every detail so he could prepare himself for the responsibilities that would eventually become his own. Charlotte was fascinated by all the beautiful objects that were used during the ceremony. She studied the ancient crown and scepter that represented centuries of royal tradition. The 7-year-old was particularly impressed by the gorgeous flowers that decorated every surface of the abbey and the way the colored light from the stained glass windows painted rainbow patterns on the stone walls. The ceremony continued with readings from religious texts and prayers for the royal family and the nation they served. Distinguished guests from around the world listened respectfully as the ancient rituals unfolded exactly as they had been performed for generations of kings and queens. The atmosphere was both reverent and celebratory as history was being made. Before their eyes, William felt tears gathering in his eyes as he thought about his grandmother and all the members of his family who had participated in similar ceremonies throughout the centuries. He was following in footsteps that stretched back through generations of service and dedication to the British people. The responsibility felt enormous, but he also felt surrounded by love and support from his wife and children. As the ceremony reached its climax, the choir sang with even greater power and beauty. Their voices seemed to lift the spirits of everyone present and create a connection between the earthly celebration and something much larger and more sacred. Even the youngest members of the congregation sat in respectful silence as the music filled their hearts with wonder. Kate held William's hand tightly as the final prayers were spoken and the official declarations were made. She could feel the historic significance of the moment and knew that their lives would never be quite the same after this day. The ceremony was not just about crowns and traditions, but about making promises to serve others and put the needs of their country before their own desires. The abbey fell completely silent for a moment as the archbishop pronounced the final words of the ancient ceremony. Then suddenly the silence was broken by the magnificent sound of bells ringing from the Chuve tower above them. The joyful noise announced to all of London and the world that the ceremony had been completed successfully and a new chapter in British history had officially begun. As the royal family prepared to leave the abbey and begin their procession through the streets of London, they knew that the hardest part of the day was behind them. They had represented their family and their country with dignity and grace during one of the most important ceremonies in British tradition. Now it was time to celebrate with the thousands of people who were waiting outside to cheer for them and share in their joy. The massive wooden doors of Westminster Abbey swung open, and Prince William stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight with his family beside him. The roar from the crowd was even louder than it had been when they arrived hours earlier. Thousands upon thousands of people had gathered along every street and filled every available space where they might catch a glimpse of the royal family after the historic ceremony. Kate emerged from the abbey looking radiant and composed, despite the emotional intensity of the ceremony they had just experienced. Her ivory dress caught the breeze and flowed gracefully around her as she walked beside William toward the magnificent golden carriage that was waiting to carry them through the streets of London. Her sapphire earrings sparkled in the sunlight, and her smile was genuine and warm as she waved to the cheering crowds. George walked with careful dignity, befitting his role as future King of England. The 9-year-old had maintained perfect behavior throughout the lengthy ceremony, and now he felt proud and confident as he prepared for the carriage ride through London. His small military uniform looked impressive and official as photographers captured every step he took toward the ornate vehicle that would carry his family through the celebrating city. Princess Charlotte practically skipped with excitement as she saw the beautiful golden carriage decorated with intricate carvings and pulled by magnificent white horses. The 7-year-old had been dreaming about riding in a real royal carriage for weeks leading up to this day. Her pale blue dress fluttered in the breeze, and she waved enthusiastically to everyone she could see in the massive crowd gathered outside the abbey. Little Prince Louis was feeling much better now that the formal ceremony was finished, and he could move around more freely. The 5-year-old was fascinated by the huge horses that would be pulling their carriage, and he asked his father if he could pet them. William explained that they were working horses who needed to concentrate on their important job of carrying the royal family safely through the city streets. The carriage was a masterpiece of craftsmanship that had been built specifically for royal occasions, like this one. Every surface was covered with gold leaf that gleamed brilliantly in the afternoon sun. The interior was lined with rich red velvet and comfortable cushioned seats that would keep the family comfortable during their journey through London. The wheels were painted in royal blue and decorated with the family crest. William helped Kate climb gracefully into the carriage while photographers captured every moment of their departure from Westminster Abbey. The crowd cheered even louder when they saw the royal couple settling into their seats and preparing for the procession to begin. George followed his parents into the elegant vehicle while Charlotte practically bounced with excitement as she took her place beside her mother. Louis needed a little help climbing up into the high carriage, but once he was seated by the window, he pressed his face to the glass and watched all the interesting activity surrounding them. Horse handlers were making final adjustments to the harnesses and checking that everything was secure for the journey ahead. Security officers were positioned throughout the area and speaking into their radios to coordinate with teams stationed along the parade route. The driver of the carriage was wearing a traditional uniform with a tall hat decorated with colorful feathers. He had been practicing this route for weeks and knew exactly how to handle the spirited horses that would be carrying the most important passengers in the kingdom. The man felt honored to have been chosen for such a significant responsibility. On this historic day, as the carriage began to move forward, the crowd erupted into the loudest cheers of the entire day. People were throwing flower petals and colorful confetti into the air, creating a shower of celebration that rained down on the royal family as they began their journey through London. British flags were waving from every window and balcony, while children held up homemade signs welcoming the royal family. The first street they traveled down was lined with people standing 10 deep on both sides of the road. Every person seemed to be smiling and cheering and taking pictures with their phones and cameras. Charlotte waved continuously from her window, while George maintained his composed royal wave that he had been practicing for months. Kate and William acknowledged the crowds with graceful gestures and genuine smiles. Louis was amazed by the huge number of people who had come to see his family. The 5-year-old kept pointing at different groups and asking his parents questions about why so many people were there. Kate explained that these people loved their family and wanted to celebrate this special day with them. She told him that all these people were their friends and neighbors who cared about their country. The carriage moved slowly through the historic streets of London, past famous landmarks that had witnessed countless royal processions over the centuries. They passed Big Ben and the Houses of Parliament, where crowds had gathered on every step and balcony. The ancient buildings provided a magnificent backdrop for the celebration as the golden carriage rolled past with its precious cargo. Street parties had erupted spontaneously throughout the city as people who could not get close to the parade route gathered in neighborhoods to watch the ceremony on television screens set up in parks and squares. Families had prepared special foods and decorations to mark this historic occasion. Children were dressed in their finest clothes and waving small British flags, while adults raised glasses of champagne to toast the royal family. The horses pulling the carriage stepped proudly through the streets with their heads held high and their white coats gleaming in the sunlight. They had been specially trained for royal occasions and seemed to understand the importance of their role in this historic procession. The sound of their hooves on the pavement created a rhythmic beat that added to the pageantry of the moment. Kate looked out at all the smiling faces in the crowd and felt overwhelmed by the love and support being shown to her family. She saw children who had been lifted onto their parents' shoulders to get a better view. She saw elderly people in wheelchairs who had been brought out despite the difficulty of traveling, just so they could witness this historic day. The sight filled her heart with gratitude and renewed her commitment to serving these wonderful people. William felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders as he looked out at the thousands of people who were counting on him to lead their country with wisdom and compassion. But he also felt supported and strengthened by the obvious love and loyalty being demonstrated by the crowds lining every street. The sight of so many happy faces reminded him why he had dedicated his life to public service. As the carriage turned the final corner toward Buckingham Palace, the crowd grew even larger and more enthusiastic. People had been camping out for days to get the best spots to see the royal family return home after the ceremony. The gates of the palace were decorated with flowers and banners while guards in their traditional red uniforms stood at attention. The golden carriage rolled through the palace gates as the crowd sang the national anthem with voices that could be heard for miles around the city. Prince William and his family had successfully completed one of the most important days in British history and had shown the world that the future of the monarchy was in capable and loving hands that would serve their people with grace and dedication for many years to come.